We are live now.
Okay, thank you. We'll get started. I call to order the meeting of the NVTA Finance Committee for Thursday, November 19th, 2020. Welcome, everyone. Mayor Parrish was not able to be with us today, so as Vice Chair, I will go ahead and conduct the meeting. First, we have on the agenda the resolution for the Finance Committee to conduct our meeting electronically. Do we have a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved, Chair Randall.
Do we have a second?
Second, Crystal.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Anyone opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you. Next, we have the summary minutes of October 15th. Are there any corrections? Okay. Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved, Chair Randall.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second, Crystal.
Okay. Is there any discussion? It's probably easier to say, is there anyone opposed? So I should probably go ahead and say that. Is there anyone opposed to the approval of the minutes? Okay, hearing none, minutes are approved. Thank you. Next, moving on to revisions of policy 19, that would be Mr. Longy.
Thank you, Mayor Rochelle. This action item and the next one, policy 20, are very closely related. 19 is the policy that we use to guide our division or distribution of the 30% funds. This was last modified to account for the I-81 money. What we're doing at this point is to incorporate the new grantors tax that started this fiscal year, as well as the $20 million transfer. And more particular with the $20 million, I'll go into that one in some more detail. The $20 million transfer does not come with a locality designation on it. There's no locality data because the money wasn't actually raised in Northern Virginia. It was raised statewide and is a transfer to the NVTA. With that in mind, we did the same thing that we did a year ago with the I-81 money and looked for a way to make the distribution. We did a sensitivity analysis exactly the same way as we did with the I-81 money and did it based on sales tax. But since we now also have grantors tax, which does come with a locality designation, we know in which locality those transactions occurred for grantors tax as well as sales tax. What we found when we did the sensitivity analysis, though, we knew the predictable outcome on sales tax, but when we added grantors tax to the analysis, we found that 3 jurisdictions had relatively marginal gains, but 1 jurisdiction had significant disadvantages. We discussed this with the RJAC over a couple of meetings several months ago and made clear the staff recommendation to the Finance Committee was going to be that we divvy up the $20 million transfer just based on sales tax. So it did not disadvantage that 1 jurisdiction within the region. So that is incorporated in the policy. It also obviously addresses the grantors tax is the second major change in the policy, which we're basically going to do the same way we did when we had grantors tax last time. We also kind of rearranged the policy structure to make it easier to address changes in revenue on a policy basis in the future. One last note on the policy change is we actually put into the policy, and this is not a change, this has always been the case, that 30% funds can be used for transit operating expenses. That question seems to have come up a lot. I think a lot of just staff moving between positions within their jurisdictions But we wanted to make that very clear. 30% funds can be used for transit operating expenses. That's not a new issue. It's just a declaration of one that's been out there for some time. With that, excuse me, with that, I'd be pleased to reply or respond to any questions.
Chair Rischel, this is Delegate Rome.
I was muted and I did not realize I was. Thank you, Mr. Longi. Yes, please go ahead, Delegate Rome.
Hey, thank you, Chair Rischel. Chair Rischel, so basically, what I asked Mr. Longi here is, I've been given a constituent request about allowing our, basically our bus services, whether it's ART, whether it's OmniRide, Loudon Transit, Fairfax Connector, just go through the kind of the list to be able to use their matching fund, or basically whatever NVTA funds that they're getting, so they can purchase electric buses in the future, as basically trying to be more compliant with where the Commonwealth as a whole and where individual jurisdictions right now and the region really are trying to go in terms of climate change mitigation. I would like to basically get some sort of idea about what sort of flexibility they have right now to be able to use NVTA funds for fleet management, more or less, and whether I do need to put in legislation that would allow them to be able to purchase electric buses.
Electric buses with the 30%, as well as the operation of the electric buses under 30% and the maintenance of those are all acceptable under the 30% funds. To maybe answer the other side of your question, for the regional revenue funds, the 70%, that would, as capital expenditures, yes, electric buses, we have actually sponsored not only the purchase of those buses, but as well as the installation of charging stations and stuff like that to build the infrastructure. But the operating expenses of the fleet would not be eligible for the regional revenue fund, but definitely eligible for the 30% funds.
Madam Chair, Delegate Watts.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Delegate Rome, do you have a follow-up?
I'll defer to Delegate Watt.
Okay.
Madam Chairman, Delegate Watts.
Yes, ma'am.
Let me offer this perspective. In addition to the 30% local funds, the General Assembly also required in 2013, when the authority got its funding, that every locality enact and dedicate to transportation without any restrictions an amount that was equal to 12.5 cents on the commercial industrial real estate tax, so that you have for a locality two sets, two funding. One, the first level, the commercial industrial real estate tax, again, must be set aside for transportation, but it can be used for any purpose. So certainly the issues that have been raised about electric buses would apply to that, as would a number of other things. And so the opening the window, if you will, on the 30% also going for operating for transit is under a philosophy that transit reduces congestion, rather than transit, in this case, being more for green energy purposes. So you have a lot of fungibility, and the localities certainly have the ability, the challenge, maybe it's a challenge, to just make sure that when they're funding projects, they fund them out of the pot that leaves the most flexibility to another pot. In other words, if I'm going to do electrical stations, I think I would take it out of my commercial industrial real estate comparable fund, as opposed to trying to squeeze it out of the 30% fund and crowd out things that are congestion related.
Thank you, Delegate Watts. Are there any other questions for Mr. Longi or comments? Okay, hearing none, we have a suggested motion. I'm sorry.
No, I don't have a question, but I want to thank Delegate Watts for those comments. That was spot on, and I'd like to associate myself with her comments. Thank you.
Would someone like to move the suggested motion?
I'm happy to move it. Mayor Frischel, this is Katie Crystal. I
And
move
I
that
have
we,
to, I'm sorry, go on, Katie.
I was just going to
I was
say,
just going to second your motion. Whenever you move the motion, I'm happy to second Katie's motion.
excellent. Well, I move that this committee recommend that the authority approve these attached changes to the authority's policy 19 regarding local distribution or 30% funds.
Okay. And seconded by Chair Randall. All those opposed to this? If we have any opposition? Okay. It has passed. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Longy. Now on to policy 20.
Thank you, Mayor Rochelle. Like I had said earlier, this is the 70% portion of those General Assembly changes. The notable feature here is, again, going back to the $20 million transfer. While technically those funds could be included in our debt service calculation, in consultation with our financial advisor, we have determined it's not in the interest of our rating to do so. And that is because this is a transfer which comes under a different group of optics and analyses by the rating agencies than would, say, the grantor's tax or the sales tax as a tax. The I-81 money, to refresh your memory, was specifically stated in the legislation not to be bondable. The legislation for the $20 million transfer was silent on that, but after talking with our financial advisor, we don't think it is in the authority's best interest to include that in our debt service calculation. So that is included in the policy. Likewise, with the 30%, the rest of the policy modifications are just kind of to streamline the structure for any future revenue changes, as well as define some more broadly define some positions and their roles within the activity. And to go back to the bonding on the 20 million, when you do the 30-70 split, is actually $6 million for the 30% local distribution fund and $14 million for the 70% regional project fund. And with that, I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Longy. Questions? Anyone? Okay. We would need the suggested motion to be moved. Do we have anyone?
I don't have my package in front of me and don't see I can't see the motion. Can you scroll down so I can see them? If you can see the motion. Okay. I move the Finance Committee recommend of authority approval of the attached changes to the authority's policy 20 regional revenue, the 70%.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Moved and seconded. Is there anyone opposed to this? Okay, hearing no opposition, the motion passes. Moving on to the next item, which is economic impact analysis. And I believe Ms. Sen will present on this.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Rochelle. The economic analysis RFP was issued on August 10th with proposals due on September 4th. The RFP was posted on the electronic procurement website called eBay and on the NVTA's website. 4 firms submitted the technical and price proposals, which was further evaluated by the RFP evaluation team, whose members were NVTA CFO Michael Longy, Senior Transportation Planner Shreen Embudri, and myself. Out of those, 3 firms received close scores on the technical proposals. 2 firms were selected for competitive negotiations. The reason the 3rd firm was excluded was that they did not show any experience with regard to transportation economics. Since we had a budget of $20,000, we thought we will throw in additional factors for analysis purpose. However, on negotiating with these firms, based on additional factors, we figured A, that the cost exceeded our budget, and B, we were not getting any value by adding these factors. as we are still operating out of old transaction. Hence, we decided to replicate previous economic analysis with Chimera, which brought the cost under $9,000. With that, this concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Sen. Questions, anyone? Go ahead. No questions? Okay. Would someone like to move the suggested motion?
I move the Finance Committee recommend authority approval of the proposed economic impact analysis contract with, make sure I say it right, Chiroma Economics and Analytics LLC.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Moved and seconded. All those opposed? No opposition? The motion passes. Thank you. Okay. Next up is Mr. Longi, FY22 budget guidance.
Thank you, Mayor. This item is just a discussion item. This is the time of year where the committee typically starts taking up the budget activity. In this case, we are preparing for fiscal 22. We normally start this process by just going over the normal protocols that have been followed in the past for the three budgets, which are the local distribution fund, 30%, regional revenue fund, and then the operating fund. So just to go over those, the prior guidance and practice, on the local distribution fund, we estimate revenues conservatively. We target revenue to budget to be slightly positive. The rationale behind that is we don't want to be at a risk position where we actually have to ask the authority to choose a project to defund. So that's why we always go for that slightly positive balance. We have built into the budget language, and this has been vetted with our auditors for many years now. We use the same language. Basically, as the budget is adopted, it almost has a continuation effect so that we will distribute whatever money comes in from the state on the 30-70 split. We will distribute that 30% to the jurisdictions. Quite frankly, there's nothing else we can do with the money. So there's a limited number of choices there. But what this language does is it keeps us from having to come back to the committee and then back to the authority for more appropriation action where the 30% amounts to exceed the projected amounts. It's just basically a housekeeping thing. Also want to note that this would be the third year, I'm sorry, that we would use the new legislation that allows us to fund the operating budget out of the regional revenue fund rather than asking localities for a proportionate share, which they normally took from their 30%. So that decision in that language will save roughly $3 million across the region. With that, if there's any questions on the local distribution, I'd be more than happy to answer them now before moving to the regional revenue.
Okay. Questions? No? Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Longi.
The regional revenue fund has much the same background as the local distribution, conservative revenue estimates, et cetera. A notable difference is we are required by our bond indentures to use this money first and foremost to repay the debt that we have. We only have one debt issuance outstanding, and it's about $5.5 million a year, so it's not a heavy load on the revenue fund at all. Likewise, this notes that the transfer for the operating budget would come out of this fund. It also notes that this fund supports the transaction update as well as technical analyses in support of the two-year program updates. With that, we're not proposing any changes to any of those protocols for either of those two budgets. And I'd be happy to respond to any questions on the regional revenue fund.
Questions? No questions.
Okay. Thank you. Moving to the operating budget. The operating budget is usually where most of the conversation occurs, but we're not putting much conversation on the table this year. We will again show the committee a base budget. We will show a base budget with escalations that are usually either inflationary or contractually required. If we have an increase in a contract that's not based on a contractual escalation, we will declare that to you. So we're very transparent about things not being added to the budget without the committee seeing it. And we don't expect to see any of those types of changes. Really, there's two discussion points for this, for the operating budget for this year. The first one concerns our lease. Like most organizations, and I think this is especially true for the authority, the lease is our second largest expense outside of personnel-related items. I think you all know better than I do, and you're probably getting very good information about the work balance, commuting, office occupancy. We have only since March 23rd through today, because we did it on kind of a projection basis, we've only used 6% of our office capacity. So clearly there are some opportunities for changes here. And as we discussed the lease and renegotiated it in 2019, several committee members were part of that. Anything we do to our lease has an impact on the Northern Virginia Regional Commission because we sublet from them. So the staff proposal is basically we will work with the commission. Their lease is coming up in 2024, October 2024. It takes years to plan these things out. I think it's too early to really judge the impact of COVID and commuting and work habit changes and stuff. But we would like to use this year to work with the commission so that neither one of us, quite frankly, surprises the other. I have talked to Bob Lazaro. He is aware that obviously that the commission, when they adopted the current lease, had a much bigger footprint than they've turned out to need. So I think he will be looking to make some reductions there. And to lay the footprint on the table, if you look at the second floor of the building that we're in, the commission is on one side of the floor, the authority is on the other side of the floor, and most of the vacant space is in between. So in order to make that space usable for the commission's landlord, there's going to have to be some movements. But anyway, I guess this is a long way of saying we want to leave this budget item alone. It's 174,000, excuse me. We want to leave it alone for 22, but use 22 to kind of form a direction for the future that works for both the commission and the authority. The second item that we have is when we rolled out.
Can we ask questions on this,
Yes.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Chair.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes.
So, Mr. Lungi, if I understand you right, even before COVID, these numbers, we were only using 6% of the capacity pre-COVID?
No, this is directly COVID related.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So then why? So then do we not expect that post-COVID we will go back to what we were using capacity, right? Both us and NVRC, what we were using capacity pre-COVID, or do we think that post-COVID the capacity is just going to go down and stay down from here on out?
Well, COVID is teaching everybody new ways of going to work, including where they go to work. And, we've not lost any productivity with only using the office 6% of the time. It does basically bring in the question of, should we be spending this much money on space?
Yeah. So we'll leave it there now on until we kind of the goal is to look and see what happens post COVID, both with us and NVRC, before we make any decisions. Is that what you're trying to say right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Any savings to us on the lease is a direct cost increase to the commission.
NVRC. Okay, I understand. All right, thank you.
Could I ask just a clarifying question about that? That is true during the terms of the current lease, or we can't conceive of a lease renewal future in which that's not also true?
When we renegotiated the lease in 2019, we negotiated that the authority would go on a year-to-year lease basis, a year-to-year automatic renewal. So unless we give notice to the commission, we automatically renew for another year.
Got it. So I think my question was just as they're thinking about lease renewal, you said 2024 is when they'd be discussing with the landlord?
Yeah, their lease expires in 2024.
Okay.
And Bob Lazaro and I have been talking. They've pretty much got to reduce their footprint.
Yeah. I do wonder if there may be some possibility, and again, noting that this is a conversation for post-COVID times, but potentially even sharing space, right? If they're not using much of theirs. And it doesn't seem often NVRC meetings overlap with authority meetings, in part because we draw from the same membership, so they nearly can't. But in any event, a conversation for later down the line. Not that I want to in any way contribute to Northern Virginia's office vacancy rate.
I have one more question, Madam Chair, if you don't mind.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Longi, we know that at this point, any of the financial difficulties or budgeting difficulties that NVRC has had in the future are now cleared up and they are totally back in the black?
I understand on an operational basis, they are operating in the black now. They've done I think Bob Lazaro has done a great job of turning that around. I don't believe they have the reserves that they once had. But yes, on an operational basis. And they've actually been increasing staff. I believe they added 2 staff members this year.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I do believe that NVRC will, their cash reserves at the end of the fiscal year was projected at $500,000.
Okay, wow, okay, that's wonderful. Okay, thank you, Dave, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Because I was around when these 2 organizations entered into the agreement that they entered into in the way of office space, it's my recollection that part of the reason to put both of these entities in the same place, so to speak, wasn't just for purposes of benefiting from rent, but it actually was to be much more efficient working together. And to Katie's point, other than meeting in the same room, I don't know on a day-to-day basis what operational activities are shared. Frankly, when I saw the first arrangement of the office space, I was a little bit surprised because I don't think that's what many of the people on NVRC and maybe even some of the people in NVTA believed would look the way it did, because it was meant to be much more collaborative, much more sharing of resources in day-to-day operations. And so we're really talking about the lease here. But for me, before we have to make any decision about this, I think it would be fair to give the commission an explanation for what type of shared things happen on a day-to-day basis. Are we sharing equipment? Are we sharing any staff? What other resources are we sharing? Because I think the point of using shared space is a good one, but I think there's more than just space that can be shared here as we move forward. And I certainly think that was the expectation when the 2 were joined, so to speak, physically. And it's been several years now since that happened. So it'd be helpful to me, at least, to understand that, because having them side by side in the same building is only helpful to us if there's some efficiencies between the 2 that can be generated. Otherwise, they could exist in isolation from each other. And I don't think that's what we want to have happen. So I want to make sure we have the full picture of this before, certainly over the next year, there's plenty of time to do that. But before we would be asked to have to take any action.
That is that's an excellent point. And I'm now in my mind, I'm wondering what other than the plotter do we actually share? I know that's the only thing I'm personally aware of is the sharing of the plotters. I see Meyer has a question.
No, I want to corroborate what Jeff said. I actually had a specific conversation with John Mason about that decision to merge these two. And I also remember discussing it with Mark Gibb. And Jeff is absolutely correct. The intent was to be more than just shared space, but for the reception area and a few other copying equipment and some other things like that. That's exactly what John and Mark at the time, that was their objective. Of course, I don't know what the circumstance is now. I think it would be helpful, as Jeff said, for the authority and for the NVRC to be briefed on the current status and practice on a day-to-day basis pre-pandemic, and see what the executive director of the authority and of the NVRC can possibly do to bring a better collaboration between the two staffs. But I specifically had a conversation with John Mason and Mark Gibb, separate conversations about that at the time.
I can, to follow up on what Chairman McKay said and everybody else, I cannot underestimate the cost-sharing benefit between both organizations of that shared space. When you look at the meeting room capacity, including the reception area, and while we don't use it as much as the commission, because the commission brings outside entities in, through that space, that is a large cost were we to try to replicate that as a standalone entity. So we are very much aware of that. We have worked well with the commission, I think, and I hope the commission would report likewise. But we do have some fairly dramatically different missions. We've been asked by the commission to work on some of their transportation proposals, give them some advice on that. As Mayor Rochelle said, when their plotter died, the authority bought a plotter, and we share its use. That's worked out pretty well. I think the staffs work well together, but I will talk to Bob Lazaro. But there are two pretty distinct missions between the two organizations and focuses. But with that, I certainly understand the message about looking for additional ways to collaborate and cooperate.
Yeah.
Are there any other comments or questions on the lease topic?
No, Madam Chair,
Okay.
I thank you. I appreciate Mr. Longi's comments, and I appreciate Mr. McKay's comments. So I think what I heard was, because we have fairly different missions, there's a lot of staff, most of the staff we can't share, but to the degree possible for the executive directors to take a look and see what is, if there is some sharing, one of space, two, maybe if things like reception staff and that kind of stuff, that will happen, knowing that some of the specialized, but we're looking for overlap and sharing when possible. Is that what I heard you say, kind of, Jeff? Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, that is what I said, Phyllis, and I would hope that we could really see that. I mean, you gave some examples, Michael. I mean, we're not there pre-COVID. Right now, hardly anyone is, but pre-COVID, we weren't there on a daily basis to kind of see what that collaboration looks like. So where have we maximized that already for awareness to the two commissions? And then where do we have potential opportunities moving forward to double down on that, to be as efficient as we can and be as collaborative as we can? So I think you have to kind of lay the foundation for what's working right now, and then hopefully can come forward with some recommendations on how we can continue to do that as we move forward. I think it's in the interest of both groups, really.
Understood.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Excellent comments and questions. If there's no further questions or comments on the lease issue, perhaps Mr. Longi could move on now.
Yes, the one potential initiative for fiscal 22 is when we rolled out the project information management system, the Nova Gateway website, etc. Many of the authority members had suggested some enhancements to it. We are working on getting some cost quotes and some scope on that with the contractor. If we have that information in time for the budget process, then we would include it and bring it back to the committee. With that, we're not proposing any other, major initiatives. The course has been for this committee to kind of watch the budget grow. We would come back next with, the base budget and any escalations, have that discussion with a target to having the budget in front of the authority by April at the latest. With any comments from this about what we could present in December from this group, I would suggest potentially we revisit this in January. The idea being we are not looking at any action items for the December meeting, which would allow the cancellation of the December meeting if Mayor Parrish agrees with that when he's consulted with it.
Any other comments or questions on this particular item? Okay, then moving on to investment portfolio report, Mr. Longy.
Again, in the CFO world that only the NVTA presents to a CFO, I have to regret to inform the committee that our cash balances increased in the last 30 days. If you remember last month, we were projecting a reduction because we had seen a lot of expenses, reimbursements coming into the pipeline. Unfortunately, those did not clear. The analysis, they will get paid and they will clear at some point, but they're taking a little bit more staff work, which then is going to move us to probably those clearing when we have 2 more months of revenue in. So we will miss what I hoped had been my dream of 2 back-to-back negative cash balance reports, but we'll deal with what we can. I would take the report to page 2, where we see that the NVTA performance to the benchmarks is still doing very well. We're 0.59, not a rate that you can brag about unless your benchmarks are 0.09 and slightly above that. So the portfolio is still holding its value. Bottom of page 3, Dev. You can graphically see where we are. You can also see the trajectory that we are on. As we've advised the committee all along, the portfolio will eventually match the market. There's just not anything we can do that wouldn't take on undue risk to avoid that. I do have, would like to point out, and it's buried in the GASB 40 report, but we don't need to go into that. In October, the authority approved some investment policy changes at the recommendation of the Finance Committee. One of those was to change our parameters for investing in Virginia municipalities. Since that time, we have been able to purchase Fairfax County bonds. We've been able to purchase Arlington bonds. We've been able to purchase City of Richmond bonds. And we tried real hard to purchase some Alexandria bonds, but we got outbid. Many of these bonds are your localities doing a refinancing. So under the new IRS regulations for refinancings, those are actually taxable bonds. And we like adding taxable bonds to the portfolio because they pay a higher yield to entice the buyer to take on that tax liability. But since we don't have, the NVTA does not have a tax liability, that additional yield just goes into the portfolio, which is more money to, in the future fund additional projects. One other change that the committee sponsored and the authority adopted was the ability to purchase IBRD bonds, or also known as World Bank bonds. We've been very successful in that we've bought 80 million of those since that policy was adopted. The World Bank bonds are paying 2 to 4 times what treasuries are. The municipal bonds, and we like sticking relatively regional because we know it's a pretty simple equation to look at a Fairfax County or an Arlington bond, and it doesn't take a whole bunch of research. Those bonds are paying 4 to 6 times what treasuries are. So it was a very good addition to the investment policy, and I appreciate your support for that, and just wanted to let you know that we are making the best use of that as a way to keep the portfolio's yield up, and while at the same time making very, very safe investments. With that, I'd be happy to respond to any questions on the portfolio report.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. I don't hear any questions. Thank you, Mr. Longi. Moving on to monthly revenue report.
Thank you, Mayor Rochelle. I will recap the monthly revenue. I'm sorry?
I mean, it's an amazing thing. Like, so we're the only organization that, oh, darn, more to have. No one else does that. That's not a normal state. I just thought I would say that.
Yep, thank you.
Can we get Wi-Fi service out there to Loudoun County?
It's a broadband desert. It's a shame there are no servers nearby.
I thought it was the internet capital of the world. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist teasing Phyllis for a moment.
It's the Christmas shopping taking up the capacity.
Yeah, well played, well played. Okay, where are we? Monthly revenue report.
Yeah, on the monthly revenue, we are positive to our projections for the revenues that we've received, which is good news. But I do want to kind of temper that good news in noting that sales tax is below last year. But it's not as far below last year as we had initially estimated. But it is still way too early to kind of make solid declarations on that. But I did want to just let the committee know there's no warning signs in front of us. In November, we did receive the first $10 million of that $20 million transfer we were talking about. So with the Finance Committee's recommendation in December, if the authority adopts those policy changes, we'll be able to start distributing that money. I have worked with the VDOT CFO and agreed that in the future, that $20 million, which was hung up with the state budget, will come to us in $4 or $5 million increments in the first fiscal month of each fiscal quarter moving forward. We have not seen I-81 money yet. That was hung up as well by the state budget, and I think the processing on that is obviously much more complex than the processing on a funds transfer. With that, I'd be happy to respond to any questions on the revenue.
Questions? No questions? Okay. Monthly operating budget report.
The operating budget, when we talk about the numbers we just talked about, kind of is a bit of a yawner. We are underspending the budget thus far this fiscal year. On the report, it looks like significantly, but that is mostly because there were some budget initiatives in there for the PIM system that haven't taken place and therefore haven't been billed, and we haven't paid for them. But even if you account for that, we are still on a very positive trajectory for the operating budget, so there's no issues or concerns with that for me to report.
Any questions? Questions? Okay, no questions. As always, many thanks to staff for exceptional work done, always exceptional. Is there anything else that we have for our agenda today before we adjourn? Nothing? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a great month.